Sales is so much bigger than what the high-ticket sales bros have been teaching you. The way that you have been taught to sell, more than likely, is just one way to sell. And there are dozens and dozens of other ways to sell as well. Because they only master one, their income is capped if they ever decide to work on a different offer, different industry, close a different type of prospect, because they can only close one type. When they move to a new offer, they fumble. When they change industries, they fumble. When leads go just a little bit colder, they fumble. Because they have never developed multiple ways of selling. And I guarantee this is the exact thing that I've seen separate hundreds of inconsistent closers making 5 to 15K a month from closers who predictably produce wherever they go, making 30, 40, 50K a month, whatever offer, whatever industry, whatever type of prospect. And so in this video, I'm going to break down 23 different sales methodologies that most closers have only heard of maybe 3 or 4, as well as which sales methodologies do best in which industries, on which types of prospects, and which offers. So let's dive in. Most people in sales get stuck into one way of selling just because they've never heard about the other types of ways. And so I'm going to explain to you some of the different types of selling that I've learned over my years of learning and of growing and of selling myself so that you can understand what is actually available to you and go ahead and start, learning from the person that you would like to learn from and learning the type of sale that you would like to have. So this is going to be a little bit of a breakdown and a guide for what's going to be best for you, as well as just what might be fun for you. Here we go. First type of sales is the classic high ticket sales bro kind of sales. It borders on emotional manipulation at times. And it's very much so 1.0 versus 2.0. This is a big identity shift, an identity change, which is fine, right? It's the way that most people in high ticket sales really learn to sell, and it does really well in high ticket, right? If you're selling a transformational program, it makes sense to shift identity from 1.0 to 2.0 and talk about how life would be different once they'll make the change, et cetera, et cetera. But the problem is that once you get outside of the usual high ticket sale, maybe you're selling a community platform, or maybe you're selling a B2B service or something like that. That's when that style of selling kind of starts to break down, as well as if you're not really a very strong personality, then you're probably not going to do super well with that type of selling. One of the reasons that it's the sales bro type of selling is that bros just do well at selling it because they typically have the worldview of, bet the farm. They typically have the worldview of make a big change, say fuck it and just go to whatever it is that you want in your life, etc. Whereas, if you're talking to, let's just say, a 40-year-old dad of 3 and husband, they're not going to say fuck it. They're not willing to sacrifice everything that their family has in order to just go and do what they want for their life, for better or for worse, whether that's right or wrong, doesn't fucking matter. That is their worldview. And so if you want to successfully sell to that person, then you need to now sell in a different way. So this leads us now to second type of sales. The second type of sales is no longer sales bro. This is more selling along with the person's values. So this is a selling towards sale as opposed to selling away from. You may have heard this type of thing before where fitness, and somebody is running away from being fat. Somebody is running away from diabetes. Somebody is running away from, living a life that they hate, where they're not playing with their kids, etc. They look in the mirror and they don't love what they see, etc. So now when we're selling towards something, somebody may be fairly happy with what they have, or at least they're not willing to throw it all in the garbage. They want to keep it at some level, but there is some positive gap that they're trying to achieve. And so this is style number 2 of selling, which is filling the positive gap, selling towards conversation. This is now less about 1.0 to 2.0, but from 2.0, you've done some good work up until this point, but now it's about optimizing, it's about maximizing, it's about going to the level that will help you achieve the new thing that you're wanting, etc. So this is somebody who walks into the Porsche dealership as an example, where they're doing well. They've got another Porsche already. They've got, another hypercar, etc. And they just want something just because they want it. You can't talk about 1.0 versus 2.0 to that person, or a 7-figure entrepreneur wanting to join an 8-figure entrepreneur community, right? At some level, you can still have that 1.0, 2.0 conversation in that case specifically, but it's a different one now, right? It's more so about achieving extra potential. It's about the cream on top of the coffee or the foam on top of the coffee, not necessarily everything inside. So understanding that type of sale is critical if you're going to be selling things that are more expensive to a more sophisticated audience, to people that are more happy with their current life and not necessarily just in a state of despair or unhappiness or like negative levels on the, map of consciousness as an example. So selling away from, selling towards. The next type of sales conversation, sales style that you can learn is kind of within this. So if you want to think about sales under the umbrella, those are generally like the two sides of the umbrella, but there are a couple of now styles that can fit on either side of that spectrum, right? So I've been seeing a lot of content lately about leveraging mental models in sales, right? So this is an example where now you can use this style of sales, but align it to whichever side that you want. So you can sell from a mental model way of selling, if you will, away from what people want or towards what they want. So as an example, a mental model way of selling may employ the mental model and selling the idea that if you have the right mental models, then you're going to succeed at whatever you're doing. It's a great kind of meta way to sell because it affects most things. If you're selling from an away from crowd, let's just go back to the fitness example. The mental model way to sell them might be like the swapping the brains analogy, right? Whatever mental model you have up here is going to dictate the way that your body looks because your body is just a manifestation of what's going on up here. And so that's an easy way to do that, 1.0 to 2.0, but changing it here first. Whereas maybe the selling towards things, somebody who's buying their next Porsche, maybe it's their third one or whatever, right? The mental model that can help them do that is doing what it is that you want in your life. Like if you have an impulse in your heart, you have to go after it because if you don't, then you are not even living life. You're living up here. You're living a lie. If you just rationalize everything away that you want in your life, then you're going to live a pretty poor life. Whereas if you have a desire here and you get it out and you go for it, like that's something that's going to help you continue to live a better and better life because your heart doesn't lie. So if your heart wants a Porsche, like fucking buy it. If not even because like it's a worthwhile investment and it holds its value, etc., just because your heart says that it wants it, and you have to go after that. You cannot forsake that. Otherwise, you're going to be like all those pansies that don't go after what they want and they just live their life working at McDonald's. Like you can still use the mental model, but now it's selling towards something, right? So mental models is a fantastic way to sell. I think it's really cool. Language patterns is the next one. So language patterns, some people call this like hypnotic selling or whatever. It's not fucking hypnotic. It's just understanding the language patterns. All right. It's understanding that people's language, and this is again kind of another mental model. That's why mental models is kind of the meta way to sell. But anyway, hypnotic selling, language pattern selling, etc., is just understanding that people's language, their word choices, the way that they phrase things, the emphasis they put on certain words in the phrase, you can tell what they value and what they don't just by listening to the way that they talk about things. If somebody says it's just 70 grand a month, or if somebody says it's 70 grand a month, like obviously that means different things. If somebody feels like 70 grand a month is a lot, they're gonna be like, 70 grand, that's insane. Versus if somebody thinks it's not a lot, yeah, it's just 70 grand a month. And it's like there's a difference in mindset there. There's a difference in belief system. There's a difference in values there. And so if you can understand what somebody values, then you can help them get more of it. And if you understand what somebody does not value, then you can help them remove that from their life. And so that's all that language pattern selling is it's deducing what somebody's values are based off of their language patterns. That's it. Like it's really not that complicated. So then to learn language selling, you're just learning how people use language and choice of words. If somebody uses confident language versus not confident language, right? This is a super common one that I'm seeing in the space these days, which is great because it's a really cool way to sell. I think it's fantastic. So if you're wanting to learn from somebody about that, go learn from it. It's a great way to sell and it will transfer quite a bit. Again, like this is just recognizing what is already there. And so you can deploy it in an away from sale just as much as you can deploy it in a towards sale. All right. Now, next way to sell is understanding the push and pull sale. All right. So this is selling based off of pushing somebody to go towards something or pulling them towards it. So It's fairly similar to saying, an away from sale versus a towards sale, but push and pull is slightly different. So if you're pushing somebody in a sales conversation, you're pushing them to do it. You're like, hey, get off the ledge, like take the step, just do the thing. And it's a very common way to sell back in old school sales, like boiler room, etc. Like it was a very pushy sale. Now, it doesn't mean that that doesn't work. It's just an older style, which means that generally the market is a little bit more accustomed to it. However, you can still use it and it's still effective. Just because it's old and just because people are aware of it doesn't mean that it's not effective. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people actually use this and close deals, and how many deals I've closed myself using this the right way with the right intentions. That's the key. Most people who use push selling, however, just do not have the right intentions. They're just like, fucking buy my course because I need to pay my rent or whatever. It's terrible. And then the pull selling is slightly different. So this is where now we essentially create a bit of a gap that is magnetically closed by the prospect themselves. So you can really see this a ton in marketing, especially. Marketing is largely done with pull selling style, right? You get them to envision and put themselves in a place that they then want to recreate. So if you imagine like going to the store and buying a Rolex, right? If you go to the store, you try on the Rolex, you get a taste of the feeling, right? You get a taste of what it would be like to own that piece of art on your wrist. You get a taste of the luxury experience of going in and being treated well, et cetera, et cetera. But then they take it off and they're like, oh, this is, we can put you on the waiting list for the next 180 days to then buy one when it's time, and we'll send it to you. But people then will pay in order to recreate the experience that they had. So this is pull selling. You're helping them realize what the potential is, and then they naturally want to step forward into it. So it's different than push. Push is you're pushing them into it. Pulling is allowing them to see it and allowing them to step into it themselves. So slightly different, but still very, very powerful. All right. This again does really well for more sophisticated audiences, because people who have been on a sales call a million times before, or who have been, they've had people in their life who try to convince them of things a million times before, aka if I go to an investor who gets pitched 10 times a day of where they should invest their money, because everybody wants their money, then having a pull sell is far more powerful for them because it's different from what they're used to. If you had an investor who is used to being sold with the pull method and you come in with the push method, then maybe that will do better. So it's understanding who it is that you're selling to and making sure that you're using the method that fits with them, that fits with their values, that fits with novelty. And there's so many just deeper layers to knowing exactly how to sell somebody and what method you should use. I think if you really want to get good at sales, if you want to have the utmost freedom in your life, if you want to have this skill set that you can use anywhere, anytime, in any scenario, any circumstance, whether you're selling to someone who's sophisticated or not, somebody who's smart or not, somebody who is experienced or not, then you need to learn how to use all of these and know which one to pick at what time. That is what matters. That is a skill that you have to learn more than even just like learning each individual one. It's like Thanos collecting the Infinity Stones, but then not even knowing which one to use at what time and just using the wrong one. Like, it doesn't matter how powerful the Infinity Stones are altogether. It's that you have to understand how to use them in conjunction with each other and individually, and knowing which ones to use when, for what circumstances. That's what makes it powerful. So I will get off that high horse and we will continue now with the different types of sales. Next one is straight line selling. All right, this is classic, like Jordan Belfort, just going straight for what it is that they want and staying on that line, and anything that gets off the line, you redirect them on. Like, that's just very, very simple, and it's effective in both, again, the towards sale and the away from sale, because it can be used in either direction. It's just figuring out what they want and helping them get it. Now, I will say, generally, I will use this either in lower sophistication markets or uber high sophistication markets, because if somebody is massive, they're a billionaire, like, they just get to the fucking point. What's the brass tacks? They don't make decisions as emotionally more often than not when it comes to investments unless you're able to kind of hack into the emotional side of their brain and help them see it from an emotional perspective. But they won't even look at it that way until you get through the logical side of things. Like, it has to make sense, and then you get access to the emotional side. Now, there's a lot of fun things that you can do in terms of positioning and angles in order to just bypass the logical side and just get straight to the emotional side. But I'm not going to get into that today because that is probably too complicated for 99% of people out there. So not even worth it. Anyway, so yeah, straight line selling can work for both of those. It's really cool. So then the next one is truism selling. Truism selling is now where you start to get into like some real hypnotic selling tactics, because truisms use a type of hypnotic suggestion called yes set questions. All right, truisms, if you don't know what they are statements that are generally accepted as true. And when I say generally accepted, I mean pretty worldwide accepted. Things like work smarter, not harder. Right? There will be some people who can argue against that and say like, well, yeah, you should also work hard. Well, no shit. I'm not saying don't work hard. Just work smarter, not harder. Or time is money is an even better truism where people like understand that. Nobody's going to fucking argue that time isn't money, right? Or things like work smarter, not harder. Time is money. Use other people's money to make money. Time is moving faster and faster as we go on. There's going to be some very hard times ahead. Like, people don't argue those things. And so using them, you are essentially getting their brain to say yes over and over and over as you use them, which is a hypnotic technique in order to get them to accept what it is that you're saying and bring the gap between you and them closer and closer and closer. Because if a thought comes from the prospect, they cannot argue it because it is their own thought. And so the more that you can basically cause your words and your thoughts to feel to the prospect as if they're coming up with them themselves, or if they are the same as their own, then the less gap there is between what you're saying and their acceptance of it. The less their internal security guard on their, frontal cortex will actually reject incoming information and ideas, etc. So this is starting to get into like some real hypnotic selling, but it's a very common thing that was actually developed by the Xerox sales team back in the day. Primarily, they were the ones that used this. And it's why they did so much money. It's why they were so successful, because it's using elements of hypnosis in it. Yes set questions, truism selling, that's all kind of one broad area. Now we get into psychology selling. There's a lot of different ways that people will talk about this, and this is just going to be my way of talking about it because I've done enough study to understand it. But psychological selling is really just about leveraging biases that the human brain naturally has that have been accepted in the field of study of psychology. So things like the consistency bias, things like the recency bias, things like sunk cost fallacy. These are just general things that are true about human behavior and psychology specifically that you can use in selling. So, going back to the consistency bias as an example, this basically says that people will act in accordance and consistence with what they have previously held to be true about themselves. So if you believe that you are a smart person, then you're going to want to make smart decisions. And so you can leverage that whenever you're framing things in calls, that you're, the smartest way to operate is to understand that you need to work smarter, not harder, right? It's a smart move to start thinking in business of time is money. It's a smart move to be thinking towards the future and looking at what the emotional cost of things are going to be, because smart people understand that every decision is emotional. And so if you can understand what that is, then you can remove it from the equation. But first you have to understand what it is. That's the smartest way to make logical decisions. So, Mr. Prospect, what is the emotion that you're trying to, you see how this works. Consistency bias or like recency bias. People remember the last thing that you said more than everything else. So it doesn't matter everything that I shouldn't say it doesn't matter. It matters less everything that you say at the beginning, but it matters most what you say right at the end, because that is what people will remember more than anything else. So make sure that you end on a banger. You close your point with their strongest argument. You close your point with the most emotion-inducing topics or whatever it is that you're trying to do through leveraging recency bias. But that's the art of psychological selling, is understanding these biases that humans just naturally have and leveraging them in the sales process, right? Now, next one is behavior selling. So psychological selling deals with the kind of thought mechanisms within the brain And it has some elements of behavior to it, like sunk cost fallacy. People just, if they've already been putting in a certain amount of work, they just don't want to lose the amount of work they've done, and they are more prone to their own experience than other people's experiences or than things that they haven't experienced. But human behavior selling is now understanding the deep layers of wiring done in the mammalian brain and the reptilian brain. If you follow like the theory of the triune brain as an example, you have the neocortex, and you have the mammalian brain, and then you have the reptilian brain. The mammalian and reptilian brain are completely different from the neocortex. So these biases are largely in the neocortex and the mammalian brain, but then behavior selling is in the mammalian and reptilian brain, which means more social cues and more deep-seated, like fight or flight responses, fear responses, reward pathways, etc., that have been passed down through our genes over generations and generations and hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of years. So human behavior selling often is a lot more covert than the other types of selling because it leverages things that most people would never even understand. Things like when I'm talking about a story about when I was a kid, as an example, and, we went to NASA because we just moved to Houston, and I got to go on a field trip, and, we were walking down the hallway, and I got to meet this guy, and he said something to me that I never would have expected. And so I was standing in front of him at the front of the line. I looked up at him. He looked down at me, and he put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, "You can do whatever you want in your life if you decided to go for it now with me. The biggest mistake that you can make is just not following your dreams. So make sure that you do whatever you want as soon as you want to do it, and as soon as you do it is when you will achieve it." So things like that is behavior selling. This is understanding the deep wiring that, number one, when somebody is a kid, that they are more susceptible to authority, they are more compliant, they are less risk averse. They're more willing to take risks, and they're more likely to listen to you and do whatever you tell them to do. Take a breath here because there's a lot here. And then also increasing things like expectancy and entrainment, increasing sensory preference as well. So talking about how I was looking up at the guy and he looked down at me, he put his hand on my shoulder, how people put themselves in the first person of whatever story it is that you're telling. So behavior selling leverages things that people don't even know exists most of the time. Psychological selling is the same sort of thing, but it's a little bit more overt. Behavior selling is very, very deep wiring inside of human beings. And so because of that, it's a lot more covert, and it is also pretty darn powerful. However, it's fairly complicated, and you can get it wrong very easily, very quickly without, if you're really not paying attention, if you are not locked into what you're doing, if you have not practiced it enough to where it is completely unconscious and fully just present in the moment, then you're going to not do well at it, and it's going to kind of come across as weird as well. You have to really understand how humans work. So that's behavior selling. All right, so next is non-assumptive selling or curiosity-based selling. This is basically where you don't say anything to the prospect. You make no statements, you make no assumptions, nothing, and the entire sales process is based on you just asking them questions. Now, this is super powerful for the same reasons that I talked about earlier, is that people do not argue with their own self very much. If they feel that an idea is coming from outside of themselves that they are thinking about, then they can. So I want to make sure that I make this clear. It doesn't mean that people don't argue with themselves. They do it all the fucking time. But it's when an idea comes from outside of themselves that infiltrates that and then basically creates a dissonance that they have to solve in their head, because humans fucking hate dissonance. They just want everything to be the same. That's the reason that you listen to all those fucking objection handling gurus online, because they're like, oh, it's easy, simple way to sell. This is the one way to do it. That's how all the marketing guys get you. There is one way to do this, and it will save your life, and it'll turn your life around, and it'll make you $1 million. No, the fuck it won't. What will make you $1 million is understanding all the tools that you have at your disposal and learning how to use them, when to use them, etc., etc. Anyway, now, this kind of question-based selling, if you will, is not new, right? All the high-ticket sales gurus teach that you should ask questions instead of making statements. However, this really can be taken to an extreme here that is extremely powerful, to the point where maybe you've heard of something called a reversal. It's a idea that when a prospect asks you a question, you don't actually answer the question, you reverse it back onto them. And, there's been some funny memes said about this from people doing it the wrong way and taking it too far and like being ridiculous with it, but it works, right? If somebody asks you about the program, for example, and like say that you have live coaching calls and they want to make sure that they can attend the live coaching calls, but they just say, when are the live coaching calls? You don't know why they asked it until you say, well, what's the main reason that you ask? Then they're going to tell you, oh, it's because I just want to make sure that I can attend them. So then me, as a salesperson, selling with curiosity and selling with question-based selling, purely not making any statements, I'm not going to say, oh, well, they're at this time, this time, this time, because the prospect can then say, oh, that won't work for me. Click, bye. Like, this isn't good. And then you have to go into objection handling mode or whatever. But if instead I ask another question like, oh, okay, well, what times would you have available to be able to set aside to make sure that you can attend the coaching sessions? Like, what is your schedule like? So then I understand their schedule a little bit more. And then I can now say the same times as I may have said before. I can again go on with the questions. Well, it sounds like largely you're pretty busy. Let me ask you, if you were able to move things around to the point where you're able to attend so that you can achieve X and Y and Z result, like, is that something that you'd be willing to do? Well, yes, I'd be willing to move things around. So then does it really matter what time the coaching sessions are? Or are you just, trying to appease something in your head? Oh, well, no, I guess it doesn't really matter when the coaching sessions are. I just kind of like to know. Like, okay, well, they'll let you know inside because they're constantly changing and we'll make sure that they fit with wherever you are. But I just want to make sure from your end. So again, anyway, I kind of got out of question-based selling a little bit there, but you get the gist. It's all questions. You make no statements with just purely curiosity selling and not assumptive selling. And this is, again, super duper powerful because they are giving all the answers, right? If they're asking for confidence from you, then you can just ask them what they feel they're really looking for. They'll realize they're looking for confidence. They'll realize that asking for it from you doesn't actually serve them in any way. And you'll ask them what the best way to gain that is just to do it. And so you never actually say anything. You're just asking questions and it helps the person move on to their next step and their next step and the next step. And then, before they know it, they're closing. So that is curiosity, non-assumptive, question-based selling, whatever you want to call it. All right, so next we have gap selling. Gap selling is a fairly well-established methodology of understanding how sales are made, and it's very, very common out there. It's just understanding that there is a gap between where the person is and where they want to be, making sure that they see that gap, that they feel that gap, that they see the ramifications of having that gap, and then selling them on closing that gap. So it's very, very simple. There's really not a lot to it. I think most people really understand what it is. It's, if you're overweight, as an example, and you want to lose 20 pounds, what does that gap look like? How long have you been trying to close it? What have you tried? How has that been working for you? How's it been working for you? Oh, shit, why not? Oh, because of X and Y and Z. And so then you're selling them on filling the gap, and the best way to fill that gap really is all that it is. So nothing too complicated there. All right, so then we got the challenger sale. This is one that I'm honestly not the biggest fan of because it's probably just because of my own biases, to be honest, about it. But this is the one where you are more of a teacher and you're more of a take control of the sales conversation kind of, vibe. Now, this leverages novelty and authority and confidence very highly above other things, and understanding context switching. So as an example, we as salespeople, remote salespeople especially, we live on Zoom, right? We live on the phone, we live on Google Meet, et cetera, day to day. We have these conversations all the time. And so the prospect probably does not spend as much time on Zoom or having these sales conversations as we do. They probably don't spend as much time talking about, like if you're selling Amazon FBA as an example, they don't spend as much time talking about Amazon FBA as you do. And so therefore you have this natural level of authority and confidence that comes with knowing that frame gap, that like you are used to this and they are not. And so you're leveraging this concept of novelty as well as authority by just coming in with this full authority, this full confidence, like here's what we're going to do, here's how this is going to go, hard frame set, any questions that they have, you can just kind of beat them down because you hold that authority and you retain that frame through that confidence and authority throughout the call. Now, the reason that I don't like this, I think personally, is because people abuse it. if you don't abuse it, then it can work very well. And I have used this many times myself. Like, it's a reason that I'm well versed in it. You can't get versed at something if you don't try it. And if you don't master it, if you don't do it enough to fail more times than anyone else is willing to fucking try. So it can be something that is very useful and very helpful with the right people. However, a downside to this is that if you have somebody who, for example, is very alpha, very A-type, very, not even just like alpha or A-type, but somebody who has programming inside of them from childhood, from adulthood, whatever, that says that anybody who is that confident or that authoritative or knows exactly what they want in that way, they are bad or they want the worst for you, etc. That's where this one is really going to fall flat on its face, because if somebody, for example, had an abusive dad as they were a kid and they ended up like running away from home or whatever because of it, and they have really bad emotions around all of that, when you come off this way on a call, what the fuck do you think is going to happen? They're going to run away the same as when they did when they were a kid, because that's their coping mechanism whenever they experience this type of person in front of them. So again, like, all of these things, you guys, are just tools in the tool belt. You cannot just rely on one of these. You cannot just learn one and then be like, oh yeah, I'm good. Like, if you only ever want to sell one thing to one type of person in your life, and then all the other prospects on your calendar you never sell, all the other opportunities that you have in the world to make money from sales, all the opportunities that you have to, persuade and influence other people around you, even if you're not in sales, even if you're an employee trying to get a raise from your boss, like, you have to understand all the different infinity stones that you have at your disposal, how to use them, when to pull them out, etc., etc. All right. So that is challenger selling. The next type is mutual qualification. So this is basically where you take the frame that both parties are qualifying each other. So like, is this the right fit for you? And are you the right fit for us as a client? And this can work really well, I think, in most scenarios, especially if you have a more sophisticated buyer. So if you have somebody who's used to sales conversations, they're used to negotiations, this is typically kind of how negotiations go, as you figure out what it is that the other person wants, and then all the other terms around that you fit in order to make both people happy. So like, if you're buying a house, as an example, for $10 million, maybe the buyer really just wants to get the deal done quickly, but you as a seller have a bunch of flexibility with things and you're okay with things going longer. You have leverage in that sort of conversation to qualify in and say, well, we're happy to do this, but honestly, we have a lot of other people lined up and we're okay if this doesn't sell in the first week. Whereas they really want it to happen in the first week. But mutual qualification selling is really more like negotiation, and it's about having leverage in various ways, more than anything else. Value selling is the next one. So when I say value selling, I'm not talking about like the internal values that somebody has, what they value, what they don't, whether it be time or money or moving quickly, moving slowly, etc. But when I say value, I mean, like, you probably know, I'm going to say something really racist here, but whatever. When you're selling like an Indian or a Pakistani person, they just want a good deal. Like, that is just something that they value. Like, they want to get a good value. And so some people need value selling in order to buy something. Like, they need to feel like they're getting a good deal. They need to feel like they're getting a discount. They need to feel like they're getting a better opportunity than everybody else is. And so if you don't know how to do this, when you come across those people, you're just going to be really frustrated by them because you don't understand that that's what they need. Like, it's really not that complicated. But most people have too much of an ego to fucking learn all these different ways of selling, and they just want to learn their one way and be the challenger. They want to, just kind of push people around or whatever, because again, that's probably just their ego coming in, and I'll just leave it at that, right? Customer-centric selling. So this one is just understanding and focusing entirely on the buyer's buying process and their decision journey. So this works really well for, again, more sophisticated buyers. If you are like selling private jets, as an example, this is a classic one. Or if you're selling, very large homes, this can be a way to do it. And so you're understanding what the buyer's typical decision-making process is, what their journey is, because they are very happy with the way that they've done things in the past, and they've created standards for their life, if you will, and how they buy things, how they make decisions that have led to really good outcomes. And so you are just figuring out what that is and honoring that. You're going completely with their buying journey. Now, this can sometimes be coupled with the mutual qualification selling, because you can have your own, journey that's required by you and your company, etc., and they can have theirs, and we're just looking to line these up. So that can work really well to combine it with that. Yeah, the customer-centric selling is typically how that's referred to, but it can work really, really well. Cool. Next, let's go on to like NLP-based selling, right? NLP, most people don't even know what the fuck NLP is. But basically, earlier when I was talking about language pattern selling, that's really all that this is. It's understanding language patterns and how they work, from like mirroring and anchoring, and just overall using language patterns in order to build rapport and guide decision making. That's all that it really is. Emotional intelligence selling is another really good one. So this is leveraging empathy and active listening and emotional mirroring in order to create trust and rapport with somebody else, and understanding how emotions work within a human being. And so you can, once you understand how emotions work, then you can influence them slightly, right? You can move somebody up emotionally, you can move them down emotionally, and leveraging that inside of a conversation. So again, that's another tool in the tool belt that's just super duper helpful. Behavior economics is another really good one. Behavior economics selling. So this is understanding kind of a mix of a couple of things. Earlier I mentioned behavior selling and I mentioned psychological selling. This is kind of a combination of those things, but understanding things like decoy pricing as an example. So if I give you, like, a classic example is like you go to a fast food restaurant and they give you 3 drink options, right? They give you small, medium, and large. Small might be $2, medium might be $3, and then a large might be $3.10. Most people want the medium, but then they see that the large is only 10 cents more and they're like, oh, I may as well just get the large. The medium probably, like, if it was accurately priced based on size and ounces, etc., would cost less, but it's used as a decoy in order to get people to buy the large so that they spend more money and the company makes more profit, right? Super duper simple. And then when people buy the small, then it's like extra expensive. So they just make more on all sides. So leveraging that is really what behavioral economics selling is. You have to dive pretty deep into psychology and neuroscience and studies and research in order to understand all of this. I've done all that, so like I get it. But it does take a lot of study for sure. So make sure that you got it. All right. Next type of sales is story selling. Story or narrative selling is it's sometimes called. But basically all that this is understanding the value of narratives, understanding the value of stories and their emotional relevance to prospects. So you can completely go through a sales conversation just telling stories about past clients, about prospects that you've talked to, about stories from your own life, about stories from their life, about stories from the influencer or the owner, or stories from the company. Like, just leveraging stories to do all of the selling for you, because whenever you tell a story, it actually activates an ancestral script in people's brains from when, like, we were cavemen and we were sitting around the fire telling stories as cavemen. But like ancient tribe version of you. Sat around a fire, and stories were how we connected with other people, and stories were how we learned. So it actually activates a lot of different things neurologically, but I'm not going to go into that, I promise. So stories, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. I don't really need to go into that one too much more. Social selling is another great one. So social selling is what leverages more tribe than anything else. And this is basically just to create more authority, more credibility, and leveraging the social dynamic between human beings. So maybe you've had somebody on your call before, as an example, who is just stuck in this comparison mode where they have friends that are doing really well, or they saw this guy who's super successful and they want to be successful like, their friend is, or whatever. Social selling is how that dynamic plays out, how to pit them against each other, how to help them work together, how to compare to other people, etc. And what ends up happening a lot, like if we go back to sales bro type selling as an example, that one teaches, and sometimes people will have the mental model of this as well. So it can be shown in mental models, etc. But lots of salespeople don't understand how to sell to that type of person. And they will therefore just say, well, that's him. What about you? And just like helping them take responsibility for themselves, deciding what they want for themselves, all that sort of stuff, which again isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just based on whatever your mental models are. But you can also use social selling. Like, it's the reason that people get competitive at auctions and get into bidding wars And this is huge for very sophisticated prospects because that's all that they care about. They care about significance. They care about comparison. They're like, oh, that guy has a black private jet. Mine's just like the basic white one. Yeah, I'll get it wrapped, but mine, I want it to be sparkling, green or something, right? Just to outdo the other guy, to be special. And sometimes not even for other people to see, but just for him to feel special himself. So social selling is a hugely positive way to sell if you can learn how to do it. It can be a little bit finicky, and you have to combine it a little bit with psychology selling and with behavior selling in order to really make it work well. Like, you have to understand how people work in order to use that. So heart selling is all about what goes on in here. Heart selling is all about helping prospects follow their heart, if you just want to think about it that way. So the innermost desires, the dreams, the inspirations, the goals, etc. This is one of my favorite ways to sell because it's extremely powerful. It can sometimes come across as like woo-woo motivational. If you're not careful, if you're not very good at it, then it just feels like you're talking at somebody, like a pep talk or like a motivational speech. And some people don't want that. So you need to know when to use it. But largely, one of the bigger reasons why I like it so much is because, especially in today's world and today's society, people don't believe in themselves like they used to. People don't have a large level of confidence in themselves more often than not. And if they do, it's usually just a front. It's just put on. They don't actually have a deep-seated level of confidence in themselves, their abilities, their ability to grow and achieve what they want in their life, etc., because they've just been beat down by the crap of life day after day, their childhood, their parents, their friends, bullies, failures at their job, whatever it might be. And so heart selling, to me, is so great because it reminds people of what they're capable of. It reminds people that they have potential. It reminds people of all the times they've succeeded in the past. And sometimes that's all they need to go and take a bigger and better risk again, because they've taken risk before. Heart selling, if you can't tell, again, I'm getting a little more passionate about this one than the other ones, because I think that heart selling is one of the lost arts of sales. I think that salespeople used to be really good at this. When I look at like the 90s, the 60s as well, it was a little bit more common, like 50s and 60s. It was more common. It was more of a common skill. And nowadays people have just lost it, partially because they've lost their own confidence. And so they just have to learn like this external skill set, because you can't really heart sell if you don't have it yourself. So it's one of those things that you have to attain for yourself, and then you can share it with other people. And so that's also part of why it's not as common, because again, the same reason why it works is the same reason that it's been held back and why it's not as common, that people just lack that internal confidence as much as they used to. So very interesting. I'd say the last one that I will say is adaptive selling. So this is now kind of a combination of everything. It is understanding, this is sometimes called like situation selling as well. This one personally is the one that I will use the most. Adaptive selling is just saying all these other types of selling that I've been talking about are tools in the tool belt, and I can pull out which tool I need for which job. If you've never heard the saying, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, it just goes to show that if you only have one style of selling, then that's the only style that you can sell in, and therefore you are limited, and every prospect is going to seem like either the type of prospect that works with that style or completely not. So then, this is where your manager might get frustrated with you because you're saying that, these leads aren't closable, or they're too cold, or whatever it might be. Giving it as an excuse because you can't sell them. The real reason is because you haven't learned how to use the tool for the job at hand. If the prospect is a metaphorical, screw, yeah, you can hammer it in and like it'll work, but it's not going to hold for very long. You can just tear the screw right out because it just completely stripped the hole. Or if you have a prospect who is a nail and you're using a wrench, like sure you can hit the nail in and like it'll get the job done, but it's not very efficient. You're going to feel fucking burnt out by the end of it. All the times you're going to have to hit it, and if, slipped off the side and hit the wood behind and damaged it, like there are certain tools for certain jobs, and adaptive selling is just understanding which tool is appropriate for which job and pulling out that tool and being able to use it. The problem with this is that it does take more work. It does take more time. It does take more effort, energy, investment as well to learn it generally. And most people don't want to do that. Most people just want the hack. Most people want the shortcut. But the problem is that the shortcut doesn't exist. The hack isn't going to get you to where you want to go, which is being better, stronger, faster, more free, better off, and ultimately just being able to live the life that you want to live. Anything worth having takes time. It takes effort. It takes energy. It takes investing. It takes all the things that nobody fucking wants to do. But that's the reason that nobody has it. So if you want it, you got to learn it. Selfish plug here. I'll say if you do want to learn it, I've learned all the stuff. If you can't tell, this is why I'm talking about it here. Because I've learned it. I've taken the time. I've studied it. And I can probably save you some time, save you some money, save you some energy if you do just want to learn it from me. So anyway, that is it. We're now 45 minutes in, so I'm going to bounce. Enjoy. Now, if your confidence as a closer goes up and down based on how well you are performing week to week, good weeks, you feel unstoppable. But bad weeks, you're questioning all your life and career decisions. Maybe the offer you're on, the mentor that you just paid, the skill set you have, and maybe even your income follows the same pattern, up one month and then down the next. And if you are exhausted from living on this emotional roller coaster that you're calling a career, what you want more than anything is consistency. Not just consistency in your income, your earnings, your commissions, but in how you show up every single day. To have a system that you can rely on so that your results stop being a reflection of your mood. And if you're ready to finally build that and take your sales career to a level where you never have to worry about money again, click the first link in the description. It's also pinned in the comments. And regardless, I will see you every single day at 5 p.m. Eastern, right after you've taken your sales calls for the day, with content that is laser targeted towards making you a closer capable of making $20,000 to $30,000 a month every single month consistently.